Now, here is Ticky Fullerton on Your Money.
Hello there, I'm Ticky Fullerton, every night bringing you a full hour of the very best in business coverage across the nation and internationally, especially where business and politics meet. Coming up, here's what many in business are wondering at the moment. What would a Labour government be like? A deep dive into Labour's economic policies, our in-depth interview with Shadow Treasurer Chris Bowen. Westpac rounds out a disappointing season of full-year results for the Big Four as housing slumps and the Royal Commission bites. We'll unpack these results with Forager Fund's Chief Executive Officer Steve Johnson. And hikes to the Petroleum Resources Rent Tax, the PRRT, to deliver $6 billion for the government. We'll find out how that's set to hit our gas industry with Credit Suisse analyst Saul Kavonic. Well, yes, a good day for our long-planned in-depth interview with Shadow Treasurer Chris Bowen on Labour economic policy, as it coincided with the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, launching a plea to business to get behind the coalition in the election campaign as the only party with business-friendly policies and fiscal responsibility. Yet, more and more business is looking to what might happen under Labour. If implemented, Labour policy could dramatically change the investment and the industrial relations landscape. Not all ideas are cheered by business, far from it, but one thing Chris Bowen can't be accused of at the moment, I think, is policy on the run. Labour's long-standing position on changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax would be delivered even in a falling property market, he tells me, and its decision to remove franking credit refunds has been met with horror by folk like investment manager Jeff Wilson at Wilson Asset Management, and he's leading a charge against Labour and threatening 10,000 signatures against the policy.
But it's really the man in the street, the low-income earners, the middle and low-income earners that are really going to be attacked. And the stories have been shocking.
But Chris Bowen believes there's a greater good. He's unmoved. Both negative gearing and franking credit reforms generate revenue for Labour, and both will be painful for some in the community. But then so are most reforms. And as Chris Bowen points out, business has had fair warning. Indeed, in the recent AGM season, big businesses have been reshaping their capital allocation policies in expectation of a change. Well, as you'll see, Chris Bowen scoffs the government claim that only the coalition has business-friendly policies. He points to government changes like empowering the ACCC to break up businesses as intervention overreach that even the regulator didn't ask for. Of course, Labour successfully fought off those big company tax cuts, which exasperated our business leaders. But it's now matched small business tax cuts with those of the government. And there's a growing sense in business that only Labour is in a position to deliver policy reform on our anarchical energy market, be it through an NEG or something similar. Where business is nervous about Labour is in industrial relations. Well, today in the Australian, Qantas's Alan Joyce, having grounded his airline to reset workplace relations, is now warning of a new push by the unions to bring back industry-wide bargaining, which could threaten jobs and the economy. Business really has two very different policy options to weigh coming the election. Well, we'll have that interview with the Shadow Treasurer in just a moment. But first, independent Kerryn Phelps has officially been declared the winner of the Wentworth by-election. After a fortnight of counting, Ms Phelps beat Liberal candidate Dave Sharma by 1,851 votes, pushing the coalition into a minority government. The almost 19% swing against the coalition is also one of the largest swings against a sitting government in history. Prime Minister Scott Morrison will now have to work with 6 crossbenchers to maintain confidence and supply. Ms Phelps says the Wentworth electorate has spoken.
It's the moment when the Australian people said, we must be heard. It's a moment when they said that there is something very wrong with the party political system that seems to have much more self-interest than interest in the Australian people. The people of Wentworth have spoken. They have spoken loud and clear, and I have heard their message. I hope that the rest of the Parliament hears that message too. And that is that the issues that are of importance to the Australian people must be the issues represented in Parliament by their elected representatives.
Well, for more, let's bring in Sky News political reporter Annalise Nielsen, who joins me live from Canberra there. Well, a very happy Kerryn Phelps, Annalise. She's finally got confirmation. How long is she going to last, and what's she going to do when she's there?
Well, I think it's a very relieved Dr. Phelps. I think she was so concerned after we did see that swing back to David Sharma, but she's at least got until the next election, and that's next May, and many observers are saying she doesn't really have to do much to be able to retain that seat. I think the voters of Wentworth would have seen just how much traction they got from their very powerful move against the coalition, and it's certainly no longer considered anything but a marginal seat, which is really extraordinary considering its history, that it has been with the coalition and its predecessors since Federation, that now they have a very strong independent. We know she has those policies behind her, that she is leaning more towards the Liberal side of things with her economic policies. She doesn't want to touch franking credits. She doesn't want to make any sudden moves to superannuation, but she's certainly tapped into anger in that area about a number of coalition policies, including the refugee issue. She said that she's going to listen to the government, and she's not saying that she's going to use that balance of power for anything disruptive. She says she wants to see the government serve its full term, and so that's quite interesting, but she's certainly not making any promises about what she will do. She's saying she wants full briefings from the government to use that position to her advantage. But I think the government will be feeling a bit better given her comments today. This is what she said to us just earlier today.
Well, my bottom line is that I think the government should run their full term, and 3 years is short enough, and I think it's important that governments do have the opportunity to run their full term as elected. The people of Australia will have the opportunity to decide who is their next government at the next election, which at this stage is scheduled for May of 2019. In terms of motions of no confidence, I would have to see how the government behaves.
Right, well, I think we've got Malcolm Turnbull coming back this week, so we're all waiting with bated breath, aren't we? But up in Queensland, the sitting Prime Minister, he had a bit to announce today.
He's got nothing but announcements this week. He's taken his bus to the road in Queensland. It's being dubbed the ScoMo Express, and it's going through a number of areas which just coincidentally are quite marginal electorates, because we know the government is quite worried about Queensland. After that Longman by-election, they saw their primary vote wiped out, and that's going to be key to winning the election next year. And so it seems like Scott Morrison's trying to get ahead of any election speculation, and he's getting out and talking to people. He's made a few big-ticket announcements. $195 million for Townsville's water infrastructure, $112 million for the extending the light rail in the Gold Coast. But the really big ticket announcement today has been these changes to agricultural visas. Now, this is something that the Nationals have been pushing for. He hasn't given them the new class of visa that they wanted, but what he's done is relaxed the requirements on 2 other classes of visas for backpackers and those from the Pacific Islands to increase the incentives for them to come and work here longer, and increase the incentives for the farmers to get them over as well, because it's making it more attractive and less expensive. And so that's something he said will have the same effect at the end of the day. And he said that it shows that he's listening to what Queensland wants. He's been touting this as a listening tour. This is what he was saying. I think it was from a farm a strawberry farm in the middle of Queensland.
Of course it was.
You know, backpackers, when they come to Australia, I know this from my time in tourism, they don't go home with any money in their pocket. Everything they earn here, they spend here. All the money goes back into the regional towns, creating more and more jobs and a vibrant economy all around the country. And we want to see that continue.
Yeah. Before you go, Annalise, we should just mention this announcement by Virgin Australia. We've got Armistice obviously coming up this weekend. It seems to have backfired regarding veterans, is that right?
It really was extraordinary, the backlash against what seemed like an obviously good announcement. They were saying that they're going to recognise veterans, and you'd think that would be so popular, but it received backlash from veterans more than anyone. They were saying that they don't want priority boarding on planes and a salute when they take off like the Americans. They want access to free mental health care support and PTSD support services. They said they want support to get veterans back and working in civilian life when they come back, and it's off the back of this $500 million investment in the War Memorial that was already on the nose with a lot of veterans. So that's something that's really played out quite poorly.
Yeah.
there are other professions that risk their lives. We've got paramedics, ambulance personnel, nurses working and doctors working in casualty, firefighters that rush into burning flames, not away from them like the rest of us do. And we should also acknowledge their contribution.
So Virgin said that now they're backtracking on their announcement from Sunday. Instead, they're going to have public consultation over a few months with veterans in particular before they commit to any plan. The interesting thing was Qantas never was tempted to follow suit. Even when the announcement was made, they said no, they weren't going to honour anyone on the front line over anyone else.
Very interesting how these things work with businesses. And Annalise Nelson, thank you very much for bringing us up to speed. It's great. All right, let's go to the Shadow Treasurer now. I think it's fair to say generally regarded as pretty good in business circles at the moment. I discussed the impact of Labor's economic policies, the good, the bad and the ugly for business with Chris Bowen a short time ago. Chris Bowen, thank you very much for joining us. Now, if there was an election today, and clearly you would be Treasurer of this country, the current Treasurer in the papers today is calling for business support. He maintains that the coalition is the only side with business-friendly policies. Well,
Firstly, Ticky, we're not getting ahead of ourselves. There's an election yet to be held, so I appreciate the confidence, but we have to earn the votes of every voting Australian, and we intend to do so. But we're putting a very strong offering forward. Now, in relation to business and Mr Frydenberg's comments today, well, this is a typical Liberal refrain, complaining that business is doing enough. But why would business bother with this government? I mean, no stability. This is the third Treasurer I've faced. I talk to business a lot and they say, well, of course we have our policy preferences, but what we crave the most is stability. Well, you get that under the Labor Party. And when it comes to economic policy, let me just give you a quick run-through of our offerings, which are superior to the government for business. Firstly, tax. You get the same headline rate of corporate tax now under both offerings, us or the government. And the Australian Investment Guarantee on top with us. 20% upfront deduction for all investments over $20,000. You won't get that if you vote Liberal. Point two, the biggest problem facing business in Australia is energy. Yeah. This is a government pathologically incapable of delivering an energy policy.
To those two things. I mean,
can I get one more before we do? Policy instability, divestment. I mean, this is meant to be a conservative, meant to be a free enterprise government, and their policy is that a politician should be able to force divestment in energy. I won't have a bar of it. Business will get more policy certainty, stability and rationality under a Labor government.
Right. Well, there were a number. You're matching the coalition in terms of your small business tax cuts. You wouldn't come to the party in terms of big business tax cuts. And there are a couple of other major issues that you're putting out, the policies that you're putting out there come this election that business is nervous about. Can I start firstly with negative gearing? Now, you've got Scott Morrison, the great mortgage belt Liberal. They are very worried about a falling market.
Who's worried? Who's they, Ticky?
The government and investors generally are worried about a falling market and what negative gearing changes might do. Are you 100% secure in this position, or would a falling market change your mind?
No, it's our policy, absolutely, and we'll take it to the election, absolutely unchanged.
What about after the election, if there was a falling market?
We'll seek to implement it through the Parliament, but the government will engage in a scare campaign. They have been since day one, Ticky. I mean, there's no news here. The government has, remember, even Malcolm Turnbull, but Scott Morrison saying the sky will fall, house prices will crash. The Treasury modelling actually says the contrary.
But it's been done before. Negative gearing has been brought in, and then it was changes, and then the changes were removed.
Well, we'll be implementing our policy. I mean, this is a policy we've announced 2.5 years ago. We've taken it to an election, a federal election. We've taken it to multiple by-elections, none of which we've lost, that we've got into holding the seat, and all of which we've had swings to us. And, of course, the government's lost Mayo and Wentworth in the meantime. But just on the important point, I accept the market has changed since we announced our policy. Of course, it's self-evident. Key markets, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, have changed. My point is this, Ticky. This is a very good time to implement our reforms. Why has the market changed? By and large, because investors have left. Investors have left the market because they are unable to get finance. A combination of macro-prudential regulations to start with, and more banks changing policies in the light of the Royal Commission. So the market has softened because investors have left. Therefore, this is a good time to reform. It'll be even less of a shock. It'll be even smoother.
So you think it'd be less painful?
Yes, because, well, I always think it was. I've always thought it was a good policy. But in terms of the actual impact on the market, Ticky, if you can't get finance, it doesn't matter what the tax concessions are. Right? You're not in the market. So this is a smooth time to implement it, which gets the policy settings right, fit for purpose going forward. Of course, we've grandfathered all existing investments, so that's protected.
Right.
And secondly, we've made negative gearing fit for purpose to try and increase housing supply.
Another policy which has caused a bit of distress in the investment community, and particularly people like Jeff Wilson, is the changes to franking credits. Now, there's been a ding-dong between you and Jeff Wilson in the AFR. The broader point, though, that a significant number of Australians have been banking on this, have planned their retirement and their savings on the current play. Now, what do you have to say to those people?
Again, we've announced this policy very early. I mean, the Liberals would have hidden this policy.
Well, not before they put their plans together.
Way before an election. Yeah. And, you know, I've had lots of discussions with people. I've had people come up to me and say, I'm a beneficiary of this. I'll do it for as long as it's legal. And thank you for fixing it because it's not sustainable. I know it's not sustainable. I know it's not fair. There are better things to do with this government money than provide me with a tax refund when I haven't paid income tax. I've had that. I've had the opposite views. Now, let's just run through the facts. This is not double taxation. I mean, when you provide a refund to a shareholder for the tax paid by the company, that's not double taxation, that's zero taxation. The net impact for society...
But it was an investment incentive which was put in and in good faith, and people
But nor should we have a distortionary tax system which encourages people to go overweight in Aussie equities, which is what it does. You know it and I know it. And if
so 10,000 signatures is not going to make a difference to you?
We've again put, no, it's not.
Okay.
Because we put the policy out very, very clearly. We're seeking a mandate for it again, not just before an election, before multiple by-elections as well.
Now, what about wages growth? This has to be the great challenge for governments of our time. Now, in the US, there's a 3.1% annual wages growth at the moment. We've got very low, relatively, unemployment here. How is Labor going to fix the wages growth problem?
Well, again, this is a real low wages growth, anemic wages growth is good for no one. It's not good for business. It's not good for, obviously, for workers.
Well, you've got the unions coming in, putting pressure on a Labor government to put in enterprise bargaining, which would not be connected to productivity.
Well, there has been a disconnect between productivity growth and wages growth in Australia and around the world now for some time.
So you'd walk away from that as a good idea?
What we're doing is considering all options when it comes to industrial relations reform. Talking to the unions, I talk to business, and we'll have a very carefully thought through, well calibrated policy offering because industrial relations is a legitimate area.
Would you look at it reintroducing enterprise bargaining?
Well, we're going through the process of consultation at the moment.
Not related to productivity increases?
Well, I can't answer the question more clearly than I know you want me to announce a policy on your interview, Ticky, fair enough, good try, but I'm not going to do that. But of course, as I said before, we've also got the Australian Investment Guarantee, which is tax relief on the condition of investment, and investment, creating that economic activity, not only creates jobs but also creates the environment for better wages growth as well.
Chris, you talk about yourself being a reformer with certainty around policy. Nevertheless, Labor, like the government, has been very interventionist, sometimes more so than the government in terms of East Coast gas, where Bill Shorten actually mentioned prices. But we've now got banking, gas, retail electricity, even threats about caps on petrol, foreign investment.
There's no Labor policy to cap petrol price.
Well, but I mean, there's been talk. I mean, where next?
From whom?
Well, in the media, but from where next? Where next?
Labor announces policies, not the media on our behalf. But again, there are areas of reform necessary. I mean, private health insurance you didn't raise, but it's a legitimate one. It's a heavily subsidised industry and therefore government intervention is warranted. But our policies are laid out very carefully and clearly. It's not me who thought up a divestment power. I mean, just saying on a whim to an energy company, you've got to sell that off. It's not me who invented the bank tax.
But do you accept that business is looking for certainty?
Absolutely.
And government intervention, when business doesn't know where it's coming from,
I agree,
creates uncertainty?
Absolutely agree, and that's why we're laying out...
So will there be a higher bank levy, for example, under Labor?
No, there won't be. But that's why I'm laying out all the policies, and we're laying out all the policies now in a careful, clear, methodical way. The government came up with the bank levy because they were short of cash in a hurry. I mean, the virtue of what we're doing... You're right, some people don't like dividend imputation policy or negative gearing policy, whatever it is. Yes. But We're laying it all out clearly now in a stable way, which means I don't have to come up with some sort of banking levy on the run, policy on the run.
Chris, just on the financial side, what do you think of the announcement of Wayne Byers' early reappointment running APRA?
I've got a lot of respect for Wayne Byers, and I think his reappointment is sensible. I have a big quarrel with the government about timing. This government has shown a propensity to politicise key economic appointments, the Secretary of the Treasury first and foremost among them. Bringing the appointment forward way ahead of time, I mean, it wasn't due to be dealt with until after the election. The Treasurer has to justify why he's now brought forward...
But you'd support it broadly?
The Treasurer has to justify why he's brought forward the appointments of the Chairman of APRA and the ACCC when they wouldn't normally have been reappointed until an incoming government of either persuasion would have the chance to have their say. But yes, I do support the reappointment of Wayne Byers, and if we had formed government, he would have been reappointed under us. But there's a principle here, which is that appointments should be dealt with when they're due.
And what about the PRRT changes? Another, I think it's $6 billion over 10 years. Would you support that?
Well, again, the detail of that came out on Friday. We'll have a good look. It's up to the government to justify the policy going forward.
Does it seem sensible in principle to you? Because obviously our big energy companies won't be very happy about it.
Well, there's a process for them to interact with the government about it, but I don't foresee a big policy difference between the two sides at the election, no.
You've talked about your private health insurance premium changes. What about Mediscare? You talk about a scare campaign that the coalition is running against you on negative gearing. Surely this is precisely what Labor is now doing in Bennelong.
In Bennelong?
Yeah.
Well, no, we're running a fantastic candidate, a former president of the AMA.
It's a Mediscare campaign, come on.
I mean, a preeminent neurosurgeon and a former president of the AMA.
Yes.
I mean, I think he's a pretty good candidate, Ticky.
Yes.
Well, he's committed to public health. He's committed to universal health care, as is the Labor Party.
You don't believe that the coalition said it time and time again that they are committed to Medicare?
Well, let us be judged on our respective policies. I mean, this is a government which has frozen the Medicare benefit schedule, which has taken money out of hospitals' funding. I mean, I'm more than happy to have the comparative policy offerings compared when it comes to health.
Okay. What about New Start? A lot of pressure to improve the adequacy. I mean, ACOS is looking at an increase of $75 a week. That'll cost $3.3 billion a year. Would you look at something like that?
We have committed to reviewing the New Start rates. I do think this is a very...
Everyone's reviewing
Well, no,
them.
the government's not. The government's not. I mean, the government is not reviewing the New Start rate. We would in office. This is a complicated area. You need to have a view to, obviously, the headline rate, but also the interaction with other government payments like rent assistance. You need to look at this interaction with the job network, its interaction with the minimum wage.
So could you restructure the whole thing? Because, I mean, people are quite exhausted about all this.
And that's why I think we haven't announced many reviews from opposition. Oppositions normally announce scores of reviews. We haven't announced many. We're very careful about it because we don't think a review is by and large the answer to some of the problems facing the country. But there are some areas, a few areas, where you really need the resources of government, Treasury and the relevant departments to be really giving the best advice possible going forward. I think the New Start rate, I mean, the BCA, ACOS, the ACTU, it's one thing that would unite them, right? That the New Start rate is too low. Hence, we think a review is justified and it would be an item of business under a short and Labor government. OK,
finally, just looking to the Labor Party conference, which has been kicked into mid-December, what sorts of pressures are you going to have to deal with first, particularly on the trade position and immigration?
Oh, look, I'm looking forward to the conference. A Labor Party conference is always a splendid thing. There's always good debate. But there's also an opportunity for Labor again to show we're ready for government, which we are. Now, immigration is always a hot-button issue. Party, full of good people wanting to do good things, and there's always different perspectives about that. But it would be well managed by both the party and the senior leadership of the parliamentary party.
Because you've got some hard lines there, and on the trade front there's very different views, aren't there?
Look, we've taken our position on the TPP. It's the right position that we took. But I do also recognise very legitimate concerns about this government's approach to trade. I mean, I don't favour putting labour market relaxations into trade agreements. Never have, never will. Free trade should not be about labour movement.
And do you reckon Maifa is going to be before or after your conference?
Well, knowing this government, he'll probably do it during conference, which suits me fine. I'll hold a press conference from Adelaide. I mean, they held by-elections to make us delay our conference. That's how juvenile these guys are.
Chris Bowen, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Nice to talk to you, Ticky.
After the break, China telco Huawei revealed to have hacked into a foreign network. We'll get the latest on a secret intelligence report from the Australian's Defence and National Security editor, Paul Maley.
You're watching Ticky on Your Money. Now, back to Ticky.
Yes, welcome back. Well, there's been a short shrift given to China telco Huawei by our government. You might remember that Huawei, along with another China telco, ZTE, was recently banned from being involved in building our new 5G network due to security concerns. But it's been really hard to find any evidence that actually proves the company is a threat to Australian national security. Well, now, secret intelligence reports have been handed to Australian officials, apparently, outlining a case in which Huawei had hacked into a foreign network on behalf of Chinese espionage services. China passed its national intelligence law late last year, which obliges its organisation to cooperate with the government intelligence services if required. Well, for more details on this story, the Australian's Defence and National Security editor, Paul Maley, joins me at the desk. Paul, great to talk about this. Now, this is a bit of a coup that you've got this, because people think about, oh, well, why are we sort of not allowing Huawei in, but no one's actually delivered any real evidence.
You're right. The concerns around Huawei and security have, for the most part, been discussed in theoretical terms. It's not a bad theory, it must be said, that the theory being that with the Chinese national intelligence law, which obliges all organisations and individuals to cooperate in intelligence collection for the greater good of China, it puts companies based in China like Huawei in a very, very difficult position.
But before it had been, oh, well, the founder of Huawei was sort of a member of the party, and, there was all these those sorts of connections, but never actually. But this is, explain what we know about this incident.
We don't know a lot, but what we do know is that there was one alleged instance where Huawei staff members were asked by Chinese intelligence services to provide administration details like access codes, network passwords, things like that, in order to get into a particular network. Now, it was not an Australian network, it was a foreign network. We don't know which country. We don't know whether the breach or the attempted breach was successful. I suspect it was probably not successful.
When was it done, do we think?
Well, it was done in the last 2 years, but we don't know. We don't know exactly when. But it was fairly recent. We can say that.
Yeah. So these new laws have come in relatively recently as well. Would this have been after the laws came in, do you think, from China laws?
It's not. I couldn't say. But what I can say is that this instance, this one observed instance where Huawei is alleged to have done this, or the China's intelligence services are alleged to have used Huawei to do this, formed part of the concerns around Huawei, but it's not the sum total of them. The government, excuse me, uses different criteria to assess risk around telco networks, and the risk is really around, as I understand it, I think the criteria they use is form, capability and intent. Does a company have the form of doing this sort of stuff? Does it have the capability to do this sort of thing, and does it have a reason to do it? And does it operate in a jurisdiction where it can be obliged? And there's only a few countries that have those sorts of laws. China is one. Russia is another. North Korea and Iran also have those laws, but of course they don't have significant commercial sectors, so the laws aren't particularly relevant. But
and all this happens, of course, at a time where we've got Simon Birmingham. He's up in China at the moment. We've got the G20 meetings. Yeah,
and it seems like, I mean, the Huawei, the 5G issue is a significant sticking point in the relationship. It's a significant irritant in the relationship between...
But really, should China honestly think that we would be anything other than a little bit suspicious of their, one of their major telcos? After all, telecommunications is the way into intelligence, you would think.
Well, that's right, and it's particular. And I'm not a tech guy, but the security people make it very clear that in relation to the 5G network, the risks are so much greater. Like the 5G network,
now, why would that be?
Well, you got me.
No, sorry, I don't mean on a tech front, but
the answer is technical because it has to do with what 5G is going to do. 5G is going to connect the so-called Internet of Things. It's 5G technology that's going to enable driverless cars and remote surgery and all this kind of really sort of next generation stuff because it connects not just you and me to our devices.
But I suppose also two-way, so information gathering, you know, so it does something to you, and you know, we all wonder whether the TV and then the, you know.
Well, the gist of it is, from a security point of view, the gist of it is, as it's been explained to me, that in the past it's been possible to keep high-risk vendors to the margins of networks, and it's been no problem. But 5G, because it's so interconnected, it's, you know, there's no distinction between the margin and the core. It all just, you know.
And the company itself, Huawei, have they sort of declared any sort of frustration with this? Because, I mean, say they themselves are independent and clean, but they're being used. So if that's the case, they must be pretty cross about this.
Well, they're certainly cross about the publicity, and it must be said that the people that I speak to in the security sector say that Huawei is a really good company. Like it's you know, they're very good at what they do. They're a great telco company, but they're just in this impossible situation.
And the other incident that you mention in your article is to do with some sort of African. Now, is that one and the same thing potentially?
Well, we don't know. It could be. It could be. But that was an interesting one. And again, we don't know that Huawei have done anything. But there was this breach that was widely reported of the African Union's headquarters in Ethiopia. Basically, data was taken every night, transferred every night from the African Union, reportedly, from the African Union's headquarters in Ethiopia to China. And this breach went on for 5 years. So they basically just cleaned it out every night. Now, we don't know what happened, but we do know is that Huawei did all the telco work for it.
Yes.
And some national security strategists have made the observation that if they weren't complicit, it was negligent.
Right.
You know, so either way, there was a
well, I suppose, you know, Exhibit A for our government to point to in any conversations with China, anyway. Yeah.
Yes, quite.
Paul Maley, thank you so much. That was really interesting.
A pleasure.
Right. After the break, Westpac's full-year profit takes a hit. We'll unpack those results with Forager Funds CIO Steve Johnson next.
This is Ticky on Your Money, covering the big business stories.
Yeah, welcome back. Well, Westpac has rounded out a rather disappointing profit season for the banks. We've been through it last week, the other two, but full-year cash profit coming in at just over $8 billion flat on year and missing expectations, with CEO Brian Hartzer saying it has been a difficult year, comes amid customer refunds and legal costs soaring in the wake of those damaging revelations of wrongdoing revealed from the Royal Commission. Mr. Hartzer says remuneration costs won't be passed on to customers, though. Shareholders will feel the pinch.
We need to put things right for customers when they go wrong, and that comes at a consequence to the P&L and as a consequence to shareholders. And it's, you know, none of us feel good about the things that we've seen coming out of the Royal Commission, and what we can do is be absolutely committed to fixing those issues, making sure we understand what went wrong, and make changes to our business so it doesn't happen again.
Well, return on equity, a key measure of profitability, plunged 77 basis points to 13% in the period, its weakest in at least 10 years. While the bank remains optimistic about the economy, it did flag some headwinds in 2019, alongside consumer caution ahead in the face of flat wages growth and a soft property market. We've heard all this before, haven't we? Also weighing in on the US-China trade war, Westpac says the tiger economy will be negatively impacted. Shareholders set to get a fully franked dividend of 94 cents per share, unchanged from a year earlier. Now, all four of the big lenders reported a drop in cash profits amid the slowing housing market and spiralling customer compensation costs, all taking their toll. Well, for more on that result and a few more things, I'm pleased to welcome Steve Johnson, Chief Investment Officer at Forager Funds. I called you the CEO at the top, gave you a promotion.
Didn't give myself promotions, Ticky.
Now, Westpac first. Would you say that was the sort of least positive of the three, or? How do you read it?
Oh, look, I think it's a similar theme across the board. Westpac probably
they wouldn't
more
talk on camera today.
Really?
No.
And probably more exposed than... I think 5-10 years ago I was sitting there saying, well, NAB and ANZ are rushing off offshore. This is going to be a disaster. I'd rather own the domestically focused banks who are staying here in Australia and doing a good job of it. You probably sit there now with the housing market like it is, with Westpac's loan writing standards over the past few years being called into question, and say, well, this is probably the worst placed of the big banks if we are going to go through a difficult housing market, and I think it's pretty clear that we are.
And especially as, you know, all the banks are coming back to that very simple model where they've got 100% exposure to that market.
Yep, and they're all competing more. I mean, you saw NAB last week with reporting, and it hasn't ever been strong in that mortgage space, but reporting way above system growth in mortgages, and it's coming from a position of underexposure there. So it's not like you can just turn the taps down here and make more profit, because it's still a very competitive market out there. And I think especially if I've heard people anecdotally talking about if you're a very good credit, I think the banks are being much more differential in their pricing in terms of identifying who the good credits are and really throwing money at them and trying to attract that customer, and then trying to identify the person less likely to repay.
Right, okay. And so do you have a view as to whether one is better than the other at the moment from a point of view of an investor? I mean, NAB obviously is the business bank. I mean, is that a better place to be?
I'm not sure. I think the whole Australian economy is so tied to housing that if we do go into a serious housing downturn, sure, your mortgage book's going to suffer, but all of the small businesses that you lent money to are going to suffer as well, because the whole economy is tied up there. Look, I'm still giving the whole sector a wide berth. I think it's challenging now because the share prices reflect an element of pessimism about the future. You know, you haven't been able to buy the banks on these sorts of fully franked dividend yields for a very long time. Yes. So the market is pricing in a more difficult future. I still don't think we're there. What's going to happen to
dividends? All these dividends keep, you know, the same dividends again. You know, are we going to be able to see the banks maintain this?
I would be factoring in a serious, and I'd say more than 50% probability that those dividends get cut at some point over the next 5 years. Doesn't mean it's going to happen now, but these businesses are going to need capital. I think they're going to need to absorb the costs of some very, very significant changes to their business models. And as a shareholder, you want to see that. You don't want them to say, well, we need to protect this profitability here because we've got to pay dividends. You want them to say our long-term future is dependent on us changing the way we do business, and that is going to cost money.
Steve, what about the retail market in the lead up to Christmas? Here we are. This should be, you know, our busiest time. I'm hearing anecdotally that it's not really starting very well.
It's not just anecdotally. You've seen plenty of retailers come out with market updates saying trading has not been good, particularly, you know, we've seen the end of October, so now you're going to start getting companies reporting October figures. Particularly, you know, September was worse than August, was worse than July, so it sounds like it's been deteriorating, and I think all of this noise around housing is not going to do any favours to anyone there at all. I think in behind this general retail backdrop, you've also got really significant changes happening to the way business is being done. It's not just online. There are new retail competitors coming in that have a different way of doing business, that are getting stock onto their shelves in 4 weeks rather than doing it once a year.
Killers, it's a different way of running inventory and all that. It's a different model.
Absolutely right, and I think it's hard to change if you're this old Maya-style business. So there's some retailers I'm quite excited about out there that are doing a very good job of putting a new model in front of people that's working quite well. So it's not all doom and gloom, but I think overall...
I think we're going to hear from at the end of the month, aren't we? Yeah. Right, now look, I must get you to run through this takeover bid. Green Cross, now a bid from TPG. Now, how is that going to play out?
I think I've mentioned this before. I'm usually very sceptical of private equity bids. They come out and announce this big bid, and then they do 3 months of due diligence and say, oh, sorry, we don't want to buy it anymore. But we now know all about this business.
Exactly.
This one's pretty much done and dusted if shareholders want to vote on it. So I think they've done an agreed deal here. There's no due diligence. It's with board support. The one remaining hurdle is really whether shareholders want to accept this price or not. I actually don't think that's straightforward. I think this is... No, I don't. I know that it's a big premium to where the shares have been trading. We took a really good look at the stock 6 months ago and perhaps stupidly decided that there were enough things to worry about there not to invest. I think some of those concerns have gone away. So this bid has come on the back of some very healthy sales growth, like-for-like sales growth. So they're reporting almost 6%. Same-store sales growth, which is very healthy in this environment. And I just think it's a space, just spending on pets. I mean, it's the one area that's got a bit of a tailwind behind it in that retail space.
No pun intended.
They are dominating the
yeah, go on.
They are dominating that bricks and mortar part of it, and the whole sector is growing fast enough that I think you can probably offset the online risks. So I think shareholders should think long and hard about this bid. I think it's a bit opportunistic in terms of where the business is at.
What's the board doing then in that case?
Well, I think they've done a good job of extracting probably a higher price than TPG came with, and I think when your share price is $4, you get a $5.30 bid. It's hard, I think, to turn around and say we didn't accept that, but it'll be interesting to see how shareholders react.
Briefly, mining services. You're getting more optimistic by the,
we've
day.
been in and out, and well, we're still in the case of Macmahon. But I think there's been some very significant share price pullbacks over the past 6 months, and I'm just not sure it's justified. The market is reasonably buoyant out there. I think the whole space is behaving. We saw BHP's really big capital return / dividend last week.
Yes.
It's still behaving in a very disciplined way, which is I think is healthy for the long-term future. You've got some big iron ore expansions to come that have to happen and will
infrastructure
happen.
Generally.
And infrastructure. So I think there's a bunch of players out there that the business hasn't really deteriorated and the share price is down 40 or 50%. Ausdrill's one that we don't own, but we're having a good look at. Macmahon is one that we do own and we think has a very healthy future ahead of it at the moment that's not currently factored into the share price. So in a pretty bullish market, it's one little sector that I think is worth a look. For small parts of people's portfolio, they're tough businesses and it's very cyclical.
Steve Johnson, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ticky.
Okay, going stateside now, and in less than 48 hours' time, voters across in the US will head to the polls for what many people are calling the most important election in years. The midterms are often seen as a referendum on whoever is in the White House, especially this year as President Trump and his immigration policies loom large over the election. And of course, it comes at a time of bumper US economic and jobs growth.
The midterms are typically all about turnout, and these are two issues that his base is very passionate about. That is why at almost every rally, the president is using the issue of the caravan to attack Democrats.
As we speak, Democrats are openly encouraging millions of illegal aliens to violate our laws, disrespect our rules, and overrun our borders. They don't mind. They don't mind. They want them to come in.
The president's worked to keep immigration at the forefront over the last few weeks by talking about ending birthright citizenship, changing the U.S.'s asylum policies, and unveiling a new policy on family separation, or at least talking about it. At this point, he hasn't taken any action on those issues, but this week he did send 5,000 U.S. troops to the border. At a rally on Friday in Georgia for Democrat candidates, former President Obama called it nothing more than a political stunt.
Suddenly they are telling you that the biggest threat to America, the biggest threat is some impoverished refugees 1,000 miles away, on foot, got their babies with them, broke, got no money.
President Trump is especially hammering the issue of immigration in red states that he won, where Democrats are in tough re-election fights, hoping that the images of a massive caravan coming to our southern border and his tough talk on border security will help Republicans keep control of the Senate.
Hundreds of Iranians have taken to the streets as severe new U.S. sanctions come into effect. They target Iran's oil and gas sectors, and it's feared they could cripple the Middle East nation's economy.
Hardline protesters unleashing their anger at the U.S. and Israel as new sanctions against Iran are set to go into effect.
These people say they have a clear message for President Trump. No matter how tough America gets, no matter how strong the sanctions are, they vow to stand up and fight back.
Signs denouncing President Trump in abundance. After Trump's tough talk on Iran, tough words in return.
He's not a good man. I hate it. And I think every person and all of the world hate this man.
And coming here to say, down with USA, down with Israel, and all of your friends.
The demo comes on the anniversary of the Iran hostage crisis, when protesters stormed the U.S. embassy here in 1979. And just hours before the Trump administration will launch new sanctions targeting Iran's vital oil and gas sector. A move many Iranians, already struggling to get by, fear could send the economy into a tailspin. Experts saying Tehran is working to try and offset the sanctions hit.
We're seeing a sort of Iran's version of pivot to the east since a few years ago. And this has not only been in the economic realm, but also in the political and military realm, where Iran has become closer both to Russia and to China.
Iran once again bracing for new sanctions and new hardship, a situation its people know all too well and hoped they'd left behind.
After the break, new tax changes for the petroleum resources rent tax set to hit the Aussie gas industry. We'll get more from Credit Suisse analyst Saul Kavonic next.
Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. Wow, business has been waiting for this one. The final review into the petroleum resources rent tax, or the PRRT, was released by the government pretty quietly on Friday afternoon, with the changes set to rake in an extra $6 billion over the next 10 years. Well, from July next year, the government will prevent big mining companies from taking losses on unprofitable gas exploration, effectively preventing them from reducing taxes. Now, the big question, will the tax hike prevent future gas projects from getting off the ground? For more on what to make of all of this, I'm joined by Credit Suisse analyst Saul Kavonic. Saul, great to have you here. Before we get into this, PRRT, any impact, what will happen with the oil market with the Iran sanctions, do we think?
Well, look, I mean, obviously this has presented one of the big uncertainties in the market. It's why part of the reason we've seen prices uptick over the course of this year. Now, already we're seeing, for example, a response coming in from the US, where US is set to produce record levels of oil next year, particularly from the Permian Basin, which could help
shale.
Yeah, which could help offset any of the declines we see due to the Iranian sanctions. But that said, you know, there's quite a bit of uncertainty around these Iranian sanctions and how much teeth they're really going to have. We've already heard Trump talking about creating exemptions for certain countries to purchase crude from Iran, but also there's some leakage that happens from the Iranian crude. I mean, if you follow some of the oil tankers, you can see they turn a lot of their trackers off, and then some of that oil gets out and gets around the sanctions anyway.
Chish. Okay, all right. Watching brief there. Now, this PRRT, how does it work at the moment? So, and how much money does the government raise?
So, the PRRT is designed to be a super profits tax.
Yes.
So it's not meant to distort investment, and it's meant to kind of capture the upside of projects,
yes,
to give that to Australians, because it is ultimately Australians' resource, not the companies. Now, it was actually designed quite a long time ago, and it was designed with oil projects in mind. And in a way, its design is quite tailored to oil projects. But Australia, of course, is not really an oil nation anymore. We're an LNG nation.
Yeah.
And there are some things which it does need to adapt to an LNG context. But we need to kind of keep in mind the reason that we have this review was about 2 years ago, there were a lot of allegations made against Australia's gas sector, where essentially Australia is about to become the same size as an exporter as Qatar.
We were going to beat them.
We should beat them next year,
right.
I hope. But we only pay a fraction of a resource tax. Now, that has kicked off this review. Now,
is that true, by the way?
So at the end of this review, I think the review's debunked that myth. And the reason, there's very good reasons why Australia pays a lower amount of tax than Qatar does on its LNG projects. So sort of like to compare Qatar and Australia and conclude that Australia doesn't pay enough tax from its LNG projects is like comparing a Ferrari and a Land Cruiser and concluding a Land Cruiser is not going as fast as it could. The reality is Qatari projects are some of the most profitable projects in the world. So when you have a tax on profits, the higher the profits, the higher the tax.
So it's not because Qatari projects are government owned and funded?
No, it isn't. It's fundamentally, there's a lot more value there that the Qataris can take. Australian projects are far less profitable, and so as a result, you get less tax. Also, we're in the early stage of the projects, where most of the tax take actually happens towards the end of the project life. Yeah. So we sort of have to be a little bit patient to get the gains
so this
of the PRRT.
$6 billion, is it real?
Look, I have some doubts around that $6 billion number. Now, if you look at the changes that they proposed, there's been 3 fundamental changes. One is actually a retrospective change which they've snuck in there, which impacts existing projects. The other ones are prospective changes, so they'll only impact new potential projects. And the third change is they've basically removed all onshore projects from PRRT jurisdiction altogether. 5 years ago, they were put in to the PRRT
this is to encourage gas to come out of the ground, presumably.
Well, they've realised that the East Coast projects, which are the onshore projects, they're such poor economic projects, these Queensland LNG projects, they're never going to pay PRRT anyway. And all they were doing was they were deducting the expenses against their profitable offshore projects. Right. So that's been removed. But where the $6 billion come from is, we suspect, is all from that retrospective change. And they're trying to hit existing projects. So specifically,
what is that retrospective change?
So the way it works is, because it's a profits tax, is first the companies get to get back the capital they've invested. Yes. And they get that at an uplift rate. And that uplift rate is being higher for your exploration spend, 15% above the long-term bond rate. So they're proposing to cut that from 15% to 5% from next year. Yeah. Now, when you fast forward to these long LNG project lives of 10 to 20 years, even a few $100 million now can result in a multi-billion-dollar tax shield in 10 to 20 years' time. So that's what's being taken away. And we look at who it's likely to actually impact. First of all, we don't expect to see any revenue raised in the next 5 years. It's going to be the second half of the coming decade where this $6 billion is raised, if they get $6 billion. But mostly who it hits, it's players who have LNG projects likely to pay PRRT in the next decade, but haven't been able to offset that against other projects. So in particular, we think the likes of Impex, Total and Shell in the Ichthys project and in the Gorgon project could be more impacted by this than the Australian players.
Really? Now, do you think that was deliberate?
Well, I think it would be, it's a nice coincidence, certainly, from a nationalistic perspective.
Yeah, so Santos is still sitting pretty, Woodside sitting pretty.
To the best we can tell. I mean, you need to kind of caveat this. PRRT calculations are exceptionally complicated and exceptionally dull. Yes. So there's a great degree of uncertainty here.
And what's it going to do for new developments?
And that's the kind of key thing which has gone through this review is, are we going to put at risk new investments? And particularly the new investments at Scarborough, Barossa and Browse will be impacted by this. It's hard to quantify the exact impact, but it's likely that there'd be some at least modest level of impact, which could make the more marginal projects uneconomic. And a particular risk, we think, would be the Barossa project, which Conoco has already said is quite marginal. And what will be interesting to watch is, do we see Conoco and Santos push for the Barossa project to get it over the line before this legislation is implemented in the middle of next year in order to avoid the new rules?
Fascinating. Okay, I don't think it's boring at all. Saul Kavonic, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ticky.
Well, that's all for the show tonight. Tomorrow night, I'll be talking with British historian and global advisor Neil Ferguson. See you at 5 p.m. tomorrow night, or catch up on 8 p.m. on Foxtel's Channel 604. Thanks for your company.